way to say Aotearoa, why do you do it? Well, because that's the name of the country, Shane. Anna Dean, Andrew Hargard, thank you so much for being with us. I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow, 3:45. Till then, bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei, a late Christmas present for Auckland and most other red zones. They will go orange, but not until the 30th of December. The outsider is Northland, with the worst vaccination rates in the country. It stays red until the next review mid-January. And Omicron could put the change to home isolation for returnees from Aussie at risk. The government's taking a second look. The COVID response minister joins us live and we'll have reaction from across the country. Thousands of people who got their COVID jabs overseas are still waiting for their vaccination certificates. A Northland big cat sanctuary that was the scene of a fatal tiger attack opens again after 8 years.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora, I'm Marama Tipole. The entire country, excluding Northland, will be in the orange COVID setting on New Year's Eve. Northland will be the only region remaining in red through until mid-January due to its low vaccination rate. All other regions currently in red, including Auckland, will move to orange on the morning of December the 31st. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says case numbers in Auckland have been falling and in the next few weeks vaccination rates will be even higher.
This decision means that Auckland will move approximately 4 weeks after they moved into the COVID protection framework at the beginning of the month. This represents 2 incubation periods of the virus, which we have consistently used to provide confidence around outbreak control throughout the pandemic.
The orange setting allows concerts and festivals of any size to go ahead as long as people are vaccinated. The Auckland Business Chamber says moving from red to orange on New Year's Eve will be hard to swallow for many hospitality operators and event organisers. Michael Barnett says it means businesses restricted by capacity limits will earn little money this side of New Year. Mr Barnett says by Christmas, Aucklanders will have less restricted access to restaurants, bars and nightclubs outside of their own city than at home. He says that seems confusing.
Getting to orange before Christmas would have been a reward for what Auckland has done in its vaccination over the last 3 months.
Michael Barnett says most businesses would have expected a shift to orange after 2 weeks at red. Queenstown businesses are questioning why Aucklanders can travel to the resort town but Australians are still locked out when the traffic lights change. The chief executive of the local Chamber of Commerce, Ruth Stokes, says with the Auckland border opening, the government is running out of reasons to keep Australian tourists out.
We would have liked to have seen Australians here before Christmas. There are so many experts saying that the reality is that a double-vaxxed international visitor or someone from Australia with very low levels of virus transmission actually poses us less risk than Aucklanders travelling.
Ruth Stokes says another summer without international tourists will be the final nail in the coffin for some small businesses in Queenstown. A Dunedin nurse has been referred to a professional conduct committee by the Nursing Council after posting threats online against medical professionals involved in the COVID-19 vaccine rollout. Under the pseudonym Lauren Hill, the nurse posted a message to an anti-vax group on social media app Telegram. She said if the vaccine was administered to 5 to 11-year-olds, it meant war, and she saw doctors and nurses involved as enemies. RNZ can confirm the woman in the video is Dunedin nurse Lauren Bransgrove, who works as a clinical advisor for ACC in Dunedin. She's previously worked as a theatre nurse and has been taking part in Voices for Freedom's events in Dunedin. The Ministry of Health confirmed it's aware and concerned about the matter. The police are also making inquiries. Thousands of people are without vaccine passes, waiting for their overseas jabs to be added to New Zealand register. When the Ministry of Health was swamped in the weeks leading up to the traffic light system, it gave out last-minute temporary exemptions, but they expire tomorrow and many businesses aren't accepting them anyway. Matt Elam is waiting for his UK vaccinations to be processed. He says the New Zealand government had all year to prepare, but the tech seems rushed. The ministry says 20,000 people submitted overseas vax records and 3/4 are complete. New exemptions will be issued to the rest. Rain is set to drench parts of the country but is not being directly linked to tropical cyclone Rugby. Met Service has issued heavy rain warnings for Bay of Plenty, Mount Taranaki and Nelson west of Motueka. Several heavy rain watches have also been issued for parts of the North Island. It's 5:04. Club rugby players will need a COVID-19 vaccination certificate to play next year. The directive announced by New Zealand Rugby applies to 15-a-side games and also covers teenage and college rugby. Sports editor Stephen Hewson reports.
New Zealand Rugby says the decision's backed by the country's 26 provincial unions and is aimed at ensuring community rugby can continue without disruption under all 3 traffic light settings come next year, following a very disrupted past couple of seasons due to COVID. The rules will apply to players, referees, coaches, management and support staff, along with spectators. The NZR's Steve Lancaster says they'll be offering guidance to clubs on just how to implement the rules.
Mercedes are likely to appeal against Max Verstappen's Formula One championship win, despite stewards dismissing the team's post-race protests. Red Bull's Verstappen overtook Mercedes 7 times Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton in controversial circumstances on the last lap to win the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and claim his first crown. Mercedes protested there were regulation breaches when the safety car was deployed late in the race, but the protests were dismissed and Mercedes have indicated they'll appeal. The Wellington Phoenix striker Gary Hooper will miss the side's next 3 games. He's returning home to Britain for personal reasons, but will be back just after Christmas. And injury has ruled Australia fast bowler Josh Hazlewood out of the second Ashes Test starting in Adelaide on Thursday. That's the news.
Killer tornadoes in the United States.
We are trapped. Please, y'all, get us some help. We're at the candle factory in Mayfield.
Calls for New Zealand to help Julian Assange.
Hey, enough's enough. Let's bury the hatchet and not Julian's head.
And a photo finish in Formula One.
Verstappen is going to win his first World Championship on the final lap in Abu Dhabi 2021. The checkered flag is there. Verstappen's the world champion.
Keep on track with the news. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Northland to the Kapiti coast, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Rain spreading south today, heavy at times. Isolated thunderstorms and localised downpours from Waikato to Taupo and Manawatu, also western Northland. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy periods with a few spots of rain. Wellington and Wairarapa, cloudy with isolated showers. Rain for tomorrow, possibly heavy in the morning. Marlborough, Tasman and Bulla, mostly cloudy. Rain developing tomorrow morning with heavy falls in western Tasman. For Canterbury, North Otago, Dunedin and Clutha, fine spells today with isolated evening showers about the high country. Cloudy tomorrow with patchy drizzle. For Westland, Fiordland and Central Otago, cloudy with a few showers today. For Southland, fine, apart from some low cloud tomorrow morning. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with rain for tomorrow afternoon. It's 5:07.
Nā mihi marama, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It's red lights off and orange lights on, but not until the end of the year. Auckland and almost all other regions in red will switch to orange at 11:59pm on the 30th of December. The only exception is Northland, which will stay in red until Cabinet reviews the settings in mid-January. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the timing for Auckland gives it more time to identify any unknown areas of virus spread.
This decision means that Auckland will move approximately 4 weeks after they moved into the COVID protection framework at the beginning of the month, and will give extra time for any potential impacts of that move to be seen. This represents 2 incubation periods of the virus, which we have consistently used to provide confidence around outbreak control throughout the pandemic.
Te Peremea Jacinda Ardern says declining daily case numbers in Auckland are encouraging to see and cause for cautious optimism. She says the decision means that all but one region, Northland, will be in the orange traffic light setting at New Year. The Prime Minister says she's hoping vaccination rates will continue to rise, with the entire country now just 47,000 doses off being 90% fully vaccinated.
Other regions at red, currently Taupo, Rotorua Lakes District, Kawerau, Whakatane, Opotiki Districts, Gisborne District, Wairoa District, Rangatike, Whanganui and Ruapehu Districts, have an additional period of time for second doses to be administered and rates to reach a greater level of protection. As I said, by this time we expect, on projection, for those areas to reach mid to high 80s in terms of fully vaccinated residents.
These traffic light settings will stay in place until at least the 17th of January, when Cabinet meets again to review them. Our reporter Nick Trubridge joins us now from Infinity Nightclub in central Auckland. Nick, what do they make of the news there?
Yeah, Lisa, as you said, I'm standing at Infinity Nightclub. I'm on the D floor at Infinity Nightclub, for those that aren't watching. Beautiful lights and everything. Now, usually, not on a Monday, but on weekends, this would be full of people dancing. Of course, no people dancing at the moment. In fact, everyone has to be seated. Now, I've got with us the owner of Infinity Nightclub. This is Matt, who I've got with us. Matt, we've just heard the news, orange but not yet, basically. Still a few weeks to go. So what are your initial reactions to it?
Shock, fear, sorrow, despondency. It's awful for us.
Why is it so awful? Go, run us through it. Run us through the current situation and run us through why it is going to continue to be so painful.
Well, we still have a lot of costs at the moment, but we haven't been able to open for 108 days. Opening in red is very difficult. We have massive restrictions on how we can operate. And customers stay away too, because they don't really like the idea of going out in red. And we also have no wage subsidy for help pay with our staff. So yeah, it's pretty desperate times. Also, the lead into Christmas pays for the lull in January. So if we don't open and do well now, there's going to be a lot of us that don't make it.
Talk to us about the, I suppose, the personal cost of this. What is it like being the owner of this and obviously Ding Dong Lounge, your other venue downstairs? What is it like for you? What goes through your mind when you get up each morning?
It's hell. It's really hell. We feel like we've been hung out to dry. We keep investing all our life savings into the hope that one day we can open up again and just do what we do and trade. But you know, we're all running out of life savings now, and you know, we don't feel like the hospitality industry has been treated with respect or honesty. So yeah, it's very upsetting.
What's been missing here? You talk about respect, you talk about honesty. What has been missing as far as you're concerned?
The big one that sticks out for me is we were mandated to close. You know, we couldn't open our doors at all. But we're being treated the same as businesses that have lost 30% of their turnover. So you might be an accountancy firm or a legal firm or something like that, and you've had to send people home, and people can still do their jobs from home, but you get the wage subsidy, you get the resurgence payments, and things ticking on okay. You know, life for a lot of people, because of this borrowing, life for a lot of people is quite normal. For us, we are just hurtling backwards week after week with our responsibilities, you know. We can't just pick up and move. We're guaranteed to pay so much rent over the next few years, and we can't pivot either, you know. There are companies that can pivot. We can't pivot. It's a nightclub.
Talk to us about, obviously you've got the room downstairs as well, and we'll get to that in a second, but talk to us about your capacity in this venue, in Infinity Nightclub. How many could you usually have in here? How many can you have in here at the moment under red?
Okay, so 550 is our official capacity. and we usually like to trade at about $350 2 nights a week, and that it's good environment. It's not too busy. At the moment, 100's our maximum, obviously, and with we've bought a whole lot of seating to be able to cater for that. But it's quite hard to attract people to a nightclub if they have to sit down.
Hey, thanks very much, Matt. Appreciate your time in what is obviously a very tough time. Lisa, obviously Matt's just run across the numbers, or the disparity in the numbers, I should say, for this venue. He's also got Ding Dong Lounge downstairs. Now, capacity there would usually be 250 when you can open as standard. At the moment, 60 people only allowed in that venue seated, Lisa.
Yeah, it's a pretty tough time for a lot of people, Nick. Nick, I have to say, you and a dance floor, that's a wasted opportunity.
I know, I'm sort of, it's Lone Raver, is that the song? That's me today on a Monday. I mean, it wouldn't be usually full on a Monday anyway, but maybe Matt and I will have a dance after this. He actually said his last appearance in media, on TV, was, what was it, Matt?
The Teddy Bears Picnic at Telethon in Avalon Studios in the 80s.
So we might reincarnate that once we come off camera.
Appreciate it, Nick. That is Nick Trowbridge joining us live from downtown Auckland. So Auckland will stay in the red zone until midnight on the 30th of December. Our reporter Louise Tanuth joins us now from Onehunga. Louise, how is the decision going down there?
Well, it's safe to say there are a lot of surprise faces hanging around here in Tamaki Makaurau this afternoon. The weather's not really reflecting those celebrations, but a lot of people were expecting to stay in that red alert setting at least until things were reviewed in about a month's time in January. Here's what some people had to say just moments after that announcement.
Oh, sirens were wonderful.
Yeah?
They're marvellous, about time. Well, was it 12-13 weeks? It was a bloody long time lockdown, And if it's going to do us good for Christmas, bring the shoppers in on the Christmas buying, and take it from there, whatever COVID has and Delta has, we'll just have to move from there. Yeah.
Good news.
Oh, I think it's good news. I think it's brilliant news.
We're doing everything online and not visiting, and my parents are elderly, so we're not doing anything, not getting around much, so it doesn't make any difference to us.
I mean, I'm sick of lockdown.
It's good.
Why is that?
Because more business will be useful and people will be able to travel better.
And Louise, what does it mean, the change for events?
Well, of course, there have been a lot of events riding on this announcement this afternoon, and one of those, of course, one of the biggest ones is Auckland Marathon, which has been already postponed once before, and that's been postponed till January next year, 2022. But I have spoken to organisers this afternoon, and they've said they're still not going to make a final decision. They're having a meeting as we speak to decide their next move, but they're looking ahead till January when things are reviewed again, leaving things till that week of the 17th, which doesn't leave people who are training much time. It's cutting it pretty fine there for that final decision. Now, there are again, of course, festivals. It's the silly season, so there are a couple of those which were on the line. One of those that has been cancelled is Hidden Valley. That was scheduled for the 27th of December, so that's missed out by just a couple days, and that was due to take place in Matakana. But there's one that has made it by just a day, and that is in Matakana as well, and that's High Life. That's on the 31st of December, so it made it by just one day. Now, there's been no official announcement just yet, but with that vaccine mandate, that could go ahead if they decide to do so. It's safe to say that a lot of events will be scrambling to get those messages out, and it's going to be all hands on deck if they want that to go through.
Thanks, Louise. Louise Tanuth joining us from Onehunga. It is almost 18 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai. Haere Akine will speak to the COVID-19 Minister, Chris Hipkins, about Cabinet's decision. Northland is the only part of the country that will end the year at the red light. The region will have to wait until mid-January to find out if they can move to the orange light. Low vaccination rates are to blame, with just 80% of people there fully vaccinated. Steve Smith is the Chief Executive of the Northland Chamber of Commerce and joins me now. So you're stuck in red until at least January the 17th. What do you think of that?
Not much. Okay, so let me be slightly more eloquent than that. Not what we were expecting, obviously, and certainly not what we were hoping for. any form of restriction at this time of the year really impacts our sole season, insofar as hospitality and tourism go. This is the time when businesses have to put away a little for the balance of the year, and it looks at this stage as though that's not going to happen quite as we were hoping.
Why were you hoping for better? Given your vaccination rates, why did you think that it was possible you could squeeze into orange?
To be quite frank, I'm going to be very careful what I say here, I guess. I rather thought that the people of Northland had done a really good job. The majority of us, by far the majority of us, of all ethnicities, have gone out and got that stuff pumped into us. And you can hear from my voice that I'm not a huge fan of vaccination, but I've had it done. But it's not so much for ourselves, it's for the people around us, and in particular those that are not vaccinated. To sort of continue with restrictions on that basis, for me, is it's a bit of pill to swallow, I think, for everybody up here.
You say that this is the time that people squirrel away, a bit of fat for later on when things get leaner. What is it going to mean that they can't have that peak summer season as such?
Well, sustainability, is the main thing, because, these people are small businesses. They don't have huge amounts of asset that you can borrow against. A lot of them, and I can tell you this is a fact, have not been taking drawings from their businesses for some time. On the contrary, they've been borrowing against their personal properties to keep the business alive. So they were hoping probably to pay down some debt and have a little bit of money left over to take them through leaner times, which no doubt are ahead. So people that are choosing not to be vaccinated, and I will be so bold as to say this, the vast majority of those that are not vaccinated in this region choose not to be vaccinated, and that's something to be respected. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I understand that not everybody wants to be vaccinated, but at the same time, have we not done enough? Can we not just please get on with things? You can hear the frustration in my voice, I guess, but just not what we needed at this time of the year, that's for sure.
Steve, are people still going to come your way, do you reckon, summer? Why would they? When they can go to an area that's in orange, and they're not going to be stopped at a random checkpoint heading into the district?
Well, I think you answered your own question. The fact is that this just puts up just those question marks. Are they going to have to go through a roadblock? Does the fact that we're in a slightly higher state of alert than the rest of the country matter? What does that mean? Will I be able to get into certain places for accommodation, or some of the places that I might want to go and eat? There are restrictions on how many people can get in. Am I going to be able to go there? Just too many questions. And all I can say is, please, Aucklanders, don't write us off. Just do what you've done in years gone by and come up here and get out to the beach and forget all about it.
Do you support the checkpoint, Steve?
No.
Don't think they should be there at all?
No.
Why?
Again, those that are wiser and more intelligent than me have told us over the course of the last few months that they would not be necessary. What purpose do they really serve? So, look, we've got a brilliant police force up here with an incredibly able Tony Hill leading them. In my view, they're one of the best agencies in the country. And they'll do their best to make sure that everything's calm and that things are done properly. But the fact is, they're not going to check every car. Obviously, that's impossible. The people streaming out of Auckland, hopefully, are either going to have a vaccination certificate on their person, or they've had a negative virus test. Really, how much risk do they pose? We've got some degree of virus in our community already. The majority of us are vaccinated. The ones that are left are almost exclusively choosing not to be vaccinated. Come on.
Appreciate your time this evening, Steve. That's Stephen Smith, who is the Chief Executive of the Northland Chamber of Commerce. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. Tell us what you think. Northland's going to basically be the only region in the red. Everybody else is shifting to orange on the 30th. Do you agree? And if not, why not? Pātui mai, text me 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Fully vaccinated with no verification. Thousands of people are still without vaccine passes, waiting for their overseas jabs to be added to New Zealand's register. When the Ministry of Health was swamped in the weeks leading up to the traffic light system, it gave out last-minute temporary exemptions, but they expire tomorrow and many businesses aren't accepting them anyway. Sam Ollie reports.
Matt Elam and his wife have arrived home from London for summer in Tauranga, but their tickets to freedom are still in cyberspace.
We joke with our friends in the UK that everyone lives in hobbit holes and that kind of thing. It feels like the tech is that kind of era of hobbit hole tech and that kind of thing, which is really disappointing. You know, we like to think New Zealanders innovative future people, and for the most part it is until you get to a vaccine passport.
They supplied the Ministry of Health evidence of their vax doses on November 19. 3 weeks later, they're still passless.
There's been such a long period of time where there's been a lot of talk. It's like, yeah, this is going to happen, we're heading in this direction, and then it seems like it's been a last-minute university project of building all this and making all this happen, and it's that kind of minimal viable product.
Matt Elam says some businesses don't trust the temporary exemptions because they're automatically generated emails. They don't have names, NHI numbers or QR codes on them. Similarly, Donna Pascoe has been turned away from sceptical eateries, retailers and a rest home.
It's an absolute joke what they wrote. I couldn't believe it when I got it. And I thought, well, that's going to take us nowhere. It hasn't even got a name. When we visited places, it didn't let us in, and I did get to a stage where I was so embarrassed. I felt like I was being treated like a third class that wasn't worth anything, and I just felt terrible.
She lives in Auckland, but says without her vaccine pass, she's had an extra 10 days of lockdown, while everyone else has embraced red light relaxations. Finally, today, her pass was provided 3.5 weeks after she submitted her records.
They said that we are dealing with a number of complex applications from across the world and are having to seek further information for many. Well, our certificates were from Australia. We were vaccinated with Pfizer. I don't know what's complicated about that.
This man is preparing to cancel his family's camping plans because his wife's Pfizer doses, injected in Germany in July, aren't yet recognised here. He says his wife is starting to regret getting the jabs early overseas because of the impact her passlessness has had on the family holiday due to start this weekend.
Probably I would just try and go there and try to convince the ranger that she's vaccinated and that the government is not doing a good job, but it could fail.
The Ministry of Health says 20,000 people have asked for overseas vaccinations to be added to the New Zealand register. It says it's been processing them as fast as possible. 3/4 are complete, but some are taking longer than expected. The ministry has expanded the processing team and added more automation, and it says when temporary exemptions run out tomorrow, new ones will be issued.
The orange light will go on in Auckland in the dying days of the year, with the city to change zones at 11:59 p.m. on December 30. That means gatherings over 100 are allowed, so New Year parties are back on for vaccinated people at places checking certificates. Auckland Mayor Phil Govt joins me now. Phil, why should Aucklanders, and in particular Auckland businesses, why should they have to wait?
Yeah, look, I'd called for us to move to an orange light situation, and I did so on the basis that we're well over 90% of the eligible population vaccinated now, and that number's rising. It's 97% on first vaccine in the Auckland District Health Board area. We've got a downwards trend in the new COVID case numbers, and the hospital system is coping. But look, I'm not surprised because the government has exercised caution, and that caution has served us pretty well in the past. I listened listened to the Prime Minister. She made the point that she wants to see a second transmission cycle from the moving to red before she acts. And, of course, we've got freedom to move outside the city from this Wednesday. So, better this year than not this year. I, was worried.
But do you still think it's too cautious, Phil? Too cautious in your view?
It's more cautious than perhaps I would have been, but then I'm not making the hard decision. They are. And, look, let's celebrate what is good. What is good is that our numbers are going down. Whereas 500 people in each of Melbourne and Sydney died in the latest outbreak, we've lost only, fortunately, a handful of people, and we've done better than anywhere else. So I'm not knocking what the government's done. I just thought that it was a little bit more cautious than I would have liked to have seen, largely on the part of the hospitality industry that has been doing it tough and, could have done with a couple of weeks extra boost as they move into the new year.
So we've just been speaking to someone who owns a bar in downtown Auckland, right? And it's hard for him to celebrate the good stuff when he says he's got no wage subsidy during this period of time. The lead into Christmas is what pays for the quiet time in January, and that he's running out of life savings and feels he's been treated with no respect or honesty in respect of this decision. So I suppose his point is that Aucklanders did the mahi and they feel like they're still being punished. Can you see why that is?
Yeah, look, I don't think it's dishonesty, and I don't think it's being punished. I think it's a
Did the rules change, though, Phil?
No, the rules are pretty much as they set out, but they have said, and look, I guess we'd condemn the government if they didn't follow medical advice, and the medical advice they got was that you just need to be a little bit cautious for a bit longer, and that so that the rest of us, all of us, can go into summer, we're able to go to get our hair cut now, we can go to a bar, we can go to a restaurant, we can have a coffee out, and we'll be able to travel anywhere in the country, but they're saying just be a little bit cautious because we know that Omicron's likely to arrive here. It is much more infectious. It may be less lethal. We're not 100% sure about that yet. It's caution designed to keep us safe and to allow us to do most of the things that we want to do as we go into summer.
But you know that will sink some businesses, don't you? It will kill some businesses, if we're honest.
It will certainly add to the pressure, though if you wander down the Viaduct Basin, as I've done a couple of times, it certainly doesn't look like the businesses are doing it badly down there. It was, it was a thriving trade last Friday night when I went down there. So they are able to reopen, but I appreciate and I accept that it would have been easier for them if they didn't have any restriction in the size of their gatherings.
We've talked to another business in central Auckland that's considering hibernating until the end of January. Do you think that there needs to be some more financial support for the government from these businesses targeted, particularly in the hospitality sector, given the timing of this decision?
Yeah, look, you'd have to make sure that you were treating all businesses that had suffered in that way equally. I guess that was one of the challenges when the hospitality industry floated the idea of a voucher system. And, my local...
But are you going to fight their corner, Phil? Are you going to fight their corner for something extra?
I've been out and I've argued the case to government, as it's my responsibility and obligation to do as mayor, that, people have found it tough, and we don't always also appreciate when people in the rest of the country say, hey, you're not welcome to come and visit us here because we're not as highly vaccinated as you. I've argued the case for Auckland. I argued the case to go to Orange. The government made a different decision. I'm not accusing them of dishonesty, though, or making things tough unnecessarily. They're doing what they think is right for the people of the country and of the city, and I accept their good faith. I just happen to have a different view. I think we could have been a bit more adventurous in moving a bit sooner to Orange, but it's 2 weeks away. So,
are you going to chuck the fireworks back on?
We don't run the fireworks. That's done by Sky City, and I'd love to see the fireworks going because there will be no limit on gatherings as of the 31st of December. So New Year's Eve could still be a good one with the fireworks if Sky City decide to put it on again.
So thumbs up for sparking it back up, then, you reckon, Phil?
Yeah. Look, I'm still celebrating the fact that we will go into this Christmas with most of our freedoms restored and the ability to travel, to see our friends and family outside of the city, and to do so relatively safely, because we haven't suffered in the way almost every other country has suffered, with tens of thousands of people getting seriously ill, hospitalised, and hundreds of people dying. That is something worth celebrating as we enter into Christmas.
Thank you for joining us. That's Auckland Mayor Phil Goff. E te iwi e haere ake nei e a checkpoint. The countdown to the orange light. Just Northland will enter the new year at the red. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins joins us live. No vax, no play. New Zealand Rugby lays down the law. And a roaring big cat attraction prepares to open in Whangarei. Homai o whakaro, send us your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Really interested in what you make of the traffic light setting changes. Northland's the only one not going to orange until next year. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines. Ane amarama mina pita pita kōrero.
Thank you, Lisa. Northland will be the only region of the country still in the red traffic light setting on New Year's Eve. Auckland and all other regions will move to orange just before midnight on December the 30th. The South Island will stay at orange. But the Auckland Business Chamber says many businesses in the city will earn little money this side of the new year. He believes Auckland should be allowed to move to the orange setting earlier because of its efforts to achieve a high vaccination rate. And Queenstown businesses want Australians to be let through the border when Aucklanders are allowed to travel to the resort town. The chief executive of the local Chamber of Commerce, Ruth Stokes, says another summer without international tourists will be the final nail in the coffin for some small businesses in Queenstown. She claims the government is running out of reasons to keep Australian tourists out. Thousands of people whose overseas vaccinations have not yet been added to the New Zealand register will be without vaccine passes when exemptions expire tomorrow. Property prices and rents have risen sharply. The Real Estate Institute's latest report shows the national median house prices has jumped close to 24% in the past year to $925,000. It says more first home buyers are turning to their parents for help and breaking into the property market. Meanwhile, rents are 9.4% higher in the year to June. Massey University's rental report shows Hawke's Bay topping the list with a 20.4% rise. It's set to be a damp few days for several parts of the country. Met Service has issued heavy rain warnings for Bay of Plenty, Mount Taranaki and Nelson, west of Motueka. And next year's Ratana celebrations have been cancelled. The annual pilgrimage for followers of Tahupōtiki Wiremu Ratana takes place at Ratana Pa near Whanganui in January. It also marks the start of the political year. Those are the headlines. Our next news update is at 6.
Nā mihi eho. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa in nai ko Nona Peltier, who's here in the studio to talk all things business. Nona, let's start with the Financial Markets Authority. Now, they've cancelled a financial advice provider's transitional licence to operate. My goodness me, that is a mouthful.
It is a lot.
What's it all about?
Well, they've brought in some new regulation and they've put in this transitional licensing arrangement until they get fully licensed. And so one of the companies that got one of these transitional licenses is an organization called Wisdom House Investment Partners. It turns out they only have one advisor, and in July he was found to have misconduct was involved, misappropriation of funds, falsifying documents that, suggested that he had an investment plan that had been signed off, that he presented to customers that had not been signed off, etc. So the FMA investigated at that time and censured this organization called Fox Plan, where this fella, his name is Paul Liu, worked. Well, when Paul Liu lost his job there because he misappropriated funds, he was very remorseful. He paid back the funds. No clients lost their money in the process. And then he set up his own business called Wisdom House Investment Partners. Turns out that he's the only advisor there. And the FMA said, no, we are taking away your license to operate because we don't believe that you're going to follow the rules as a provider, seeing as you're the only advisor in the place.
Yeah,
So the
okay.
end of that, yeah. So they're saying, look, they're going to crack down on anybody who behaves in that way. But this is the first time they've done it.
No, I see a crispy, fresh $20 note on the desk here, and I'm thinking, ooh, cash monies. So the Reserve Bank, they have issued a new batch of $20 notes. What's the difference?
Well, it's been a while.
Queen.
It's been a while since you've seen a 20, I betcha.
Yeah, totally. Nobody's using cash at the moment in Auckland because of COVID
I
as
always
well.
have the $20 here.
You already have a $20 note.
I had a 20 ready to go. Yeah, the only difference is actually the signature. This one was signed by the former
Reserve Bank
Governor Grant Spencer. The new one is signed by.
Oh, so this is an old one.
Yeah,
so
check it out.
That tiny little bit of scrawl across there is the old governor, and we change our $20 notes just to reprint with a new person's signature.
Well, I think we haven't been using as much cash. We probably had faster turnover in the past. Adrian Orr's been the governor, the governor of the bank for a while, but his name is also on the 50s. So we did have a reprint of the 50s. Apparently, we did.
Do we know how much it costs to reprint the money with a new signature on it?
It's part of that whole movement to cash. There's a lot less cash being used.
Yeah.
But the Reserve Bank says that that cash is still king for people. They do not want to lose their cash. And so they are still putting it into circulation. But the costs of it is one of the things that is a concern because it costs money to dispense cash. And so they're looking at all sorts of options on how...
So for train spotters of money, just look under the bit that says the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, Te Putia Matua, and check out the signature and you'll know when your money was printed.
If it's old money or new money.
According to the signature.
Adrian Orr is the one, that's the key.
Okay,
look
that's
for the Adrian Orr. There you go.
That's a curiosity. No. Okay, well, tell us about the markets today.
We had a really strong start to the week. And that's what we've seen across Asia. We rose 1.1%. That's the NZX Top 50 Index. Some of the gainers there were like Main Freight, who benefits, of course, from all of this COVID-related online shopping and so forth.
Transporting goodies around the country.
Yes.
Yep.
And also Fisher & Paykel Healthcare because of the...
respirators?
Yes, that's right. And because of the unknown around the variant. Anyways, we gained 1.125%. To 12,994, Bracco, almost to 1,300, 145 points up. And the dollar, we just a touch under 68 US cents, which is where we really were on Friday. 94.8 Australian, slightly down, and 51.3 pence.
Thanks, Nona.
I'll be back tomorrow.
You can leave your $20.
No, keeping it.
Nona Peltier with Business News. Ka kite, Nona. Tech companies say thousands more overseas recruits are needed to help offset a critical skills shortage, exacerbated by border closures. The government is granting 600 border exemptions to tech specialists from next year, but the industry says many more are needed. Jean Edwards reports.
New Zealand's fast-growing tech sector is one of the country's top exporters, but it's been starved of the world's best during the coronavirus pandemic. NZ Tech Chief Executive Graham Muller says border closures and a pandemic-prompted digital shift has created huge unmet demand for tech talent.
So you've just had this pent-up demand from tech companies and also all these companies that have had to go digital because of COVID. It's suddenly gone, we need more digital workers. And they're drawing on the same pool of talent.
In an effort to grow the pool, the government is granting 600 so-called border class exceptions to ICT specialists from next year. They'll have to meet a salary threshold and won't be able to come unless they can land a spot in MIQ, which is still hard to do. Smaller tech company heads like Tim Warren from Ambit hope businesses with big budgets aren't the only ones to benefit.
I know of large companies that are hiring 600 people on their own, in their own right. So if you're one of those large companies, you can take on that many in one go, then it's really a drop in the bucket.
Up to 4,500 IT visas were issued every year before the pandemic, partly because of a mismatch between demand for people with specialist skills and a lack of experienced graduates. There's now a critical skills shortage because of border closures. Graham Muller says spots will likely go to the most senior in-demand roles and small companies shouldn't miss out.
It is likely to be a ballot system. It's likely that we'll release a few hundred a month just to get a view on how the demand is and who's getting them, and that'll make it equal for whoever gets an application, and it won't matter what size you are.
The government is also letting in more migrant workers to offset labour shortages in the agriculture industry. Waikato contractor John Austin usually employs about 20 overseas workers for the busy harvesting season, but only managed to get one last time because of the lack of room in MIQ.
This year we've had a lot more damage to equipment and just the stress and the risk of having people out there that possibly are not the right fit for the jobs.
The government has already granted border exceptions for 200 dairy workers and will now be more flexible about what type of jobs they do. But Dairy NZ spokesman Nick Robinson says a further 1,500 workers are needed next year.
We know there are significant labour shortages in the dairy sector at the moment. Recent labour surveys show that we have a shortage of around between 2,000 to 4,000 workers, and this is taking a real toll on farmers.
Nick Robinson says farmers have been working long hours and desperately need the extra help for spring. The government will release more details about the border exception process in the new year.
And it is 17 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And Moriaki na Pita Kōrero, after the news at 6, the New Year's party is back on in Taupo, but how needed are the Christmas week earnings for bars? And returning to our top story now, Auckland will move to the orange zone in the traffic light system at midnight on the 30th of December. All other red regions, apart from Northland, will also move to orange at that time. Northland will stay in red until at least Cabinet's next review, which is on January the 17th. And the COVID response minister is Chris Hipkins, and he joins me now. Tēnā koe, Minister.
Tēnā koe, Lisa.
Why does Auckland in particular have to wait until December 30th?
What we've based that on is giving 4 clear weeks after moving to the traffic light framework. So obviously opening up considerably, which is what has happened in Auckland over the last 2 weeks, has the potential to have spread COVID-19 into many more places. Now, it can take some time to identify exactly how far and wide it is spread. We are still trying to suppress the spread of COVID-19. So this will, if what we've said is if, the case numbers stay stable, we don't see big spikes in cases as a result of the opening up, then we feel pretty confident about moving Auckland to that orange setting.
But Auckland got to all the milestones that you initially set out. Vaccination rates, ICU admissions down, case numbers down. Why did you move the goalposts?
It's not about moving the goalposts. This is about a transition. It's about a managed transition. So Auckland has hit those milestones. What we want to do is make sure that we don't go backwards as we open up more freedom. So there's a much more activity in Auckland happening now than there was 3 weeks ago, and that's a fantastic thing. We want to make sure that hasn't resulted in big spikes in case numbers that have not yet been detected.
But if you're saying that, Minister, that suggests if there are spikes that you won't go ahead with the decision on the 30th. So could you backtrack if the next few days show us a pattern that you're not comfortable with? Because otherwise you could move now.
They would have to be quite big spikes in cases and an increase in the rate of hospitalisation. I think we're very happy with the rate that Auckland is. Auckland is currently trending down, and we would very much like to see that continue. Having said that,
Minister, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is important. Given what you've just said, then the logic doesn't apply to wait to that date because you're not going to make any changes based on what happens in this time period we're in now. So there's no reason we couldn't have moved, say, today.
Well, like I said, we wanted to give work through 2 full transmission cycles, that 4-week period, so that we can understand what the spread of COVID-19 has been as a result of moving to the traffic light framework.
So what is it specifically that you are worried about here?
Well, potentially, significant increase in the spread of COVID-19 within the community. It's spread into areas that we know are potentially more vulnerable. All of those things come into play.
Are you talking about Northland specifically? When Auckland's get on the move, that potentially you'll have more cases than Northland can cope with?
No, that's not a factor here. That's why one of the reasons Northland's staying in red is because they've got very low vaccination rates compared to the rest of the country. That's a challenge for Northland, not for Auckland. We're still removing the boundary around Auckland or easing the boundary around Auckland so that people can travel with either vaccination or a test. That happens from tomorrow.
So, Minister, are you not ruling out that you could come back earlier than the 17th of January and adjust settings if you see something that you're uncomfortable with?
Oh, you never rule anything out in this when you're dealing with COVID-19. There's still, we're trying to provide as much certainty for people as we can in an environment that's very uncertain.
So if we can talk about people returning home, right? So the timeline for isolating at home would have New Zealanders returning from Australia from the 16th of January next year. They would be able to isolate at home, right? So what would stop that happening? Because the Prime Minister is saying that you're going to review the decision before that date.
Oh, look, we've set a check-in time, and what we said when we announced it was we're very committed to those dates, but we've always said if we got a vaccine-resistant variant, and we still don't fully understand Omicron yet, the jury's still out on that, then we would reserve the ability to review that decision. That's the space that we want to make sure we're not in when we actually do make that transition.
What date are you going to review it on? When will people know?
People would be looking to give people at least a week's notice if there was going to be any revision to that date. So we'll be reviewing that towards the end of the first week of January.
A week, Minister, is that reasonable?
Look, there are no easy choices here. We want to provide as much time as we can to understand Omicron in particular, to gather information from around the world about whether it is vaccine resistant, about whether it's more transmissible, and if so, how much. I think evidence is suggesting it is more transmissible. What the actual impact on health is of Omicron, because there's some suggestions that it could have less of an impact on health. So there's just a lot that we don't know at this point, and so we want to make sure that we've got as much information as possible.
While we've been talking, we've had this in from a listener. Could you please ask the COVID Minister what he would say to those of us New Zealand citizens who have waited and waited to come home and now have tickets for the end of February that would have to be cancelled if home isolation does not proceed? We are triple vaccinated in Europe, will be crushed if the government goes back on its announcement. MIQ lottery is a nightmare, and the impact of us all being locked out of our tūranga waiwai on our mental health is enormous. Can you speak to that listener, please?
Oh, I can, absolutely, and I have absolutely no qualms about the fact that there is that these border restrictions have had huge impacts on families. They've had huge impacts on Kiwis abroad who are keen to come home. But when you speak to some of those New Zealanders who are struggling to get home, they're also very proud of what we've been able to achieve in New Zealand in terms of our low rates of COVID mortality and so on, and they want to see that continue. So
but you're not giving them much time, are you, Minister? You're not giving them particularly a lot of time. There would have been people who, when you put this timeline out, made their bookings, paid their money, got themselves organised, and now you're telling them a week before the new system is to come into play, when all other options will have passed for them, you could remove the option to home isolate for returnees from Australia.
Oh, like I said, we're trying to provide as much certainty as we can in a very uncertain environment that we're dealing with at the moment. And so, I'm certainly, and the Prime Minister is certainly not saying that those dates, that the plan won't go ahead as planned. But we have to have a check-in to make sure that there's nothing new, there's not new information that could potentially disrupt that.
So, Minister, would your advice to people be that they should still apply for the MOQ lottery if they're in Australia and wish to come home?
There is absolutely no harm in doing that, but like I said, there's a lot of uncertainty there.
So do they need that backstop, you reckon?
Look, I would not tell them not to apply. So if they're going to apply, there'll be regular lobbies over about one a week over the next month or so, and certainly people can put their names forward for those.
Any more targeted assistance for the hospitality area in Auckland? They're really suffering, and this extra weight is going to hurt them more. And they are running out of life savings, some of them say. Is there any more help? And I know you've got the transition payment, but they've got no wage subsidy anymore. That's a one-off payment. Is there anything else coming?
Obviously, there's more customers coming, so moving to the red traffic light fitting, does actually provide them much more ability to operate, have customers on site, and then obviously, as we head towards the end of December, our plan is to make sure that they can operate with a much greater number of customers on site.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is COVID Response Minister Chris Hipkins. Unvaccinated rugby players have been kicked to touch with vaccine passes needed to play club rugby from next year. New Zealand Rugby says it will ensure games can go ahead at all three traffic light settings. Felicity Reid reports.
Signing up to play club rugby next year will require more than your name, age and whether you can help out with the sausage sizzle. Your vaccination status will also need to be noted. New Zealand's head of community rugby, Steve Lancaster, explains why.
If people do not have a vaccine certificate, then the numbers are severely restricted. And in the case of rugby, where you need a lot of participants to play a game of 15-a-side, that really challenges our ability to play rugby at all. So in the short term, we'd be taking a pretty simplistic approach to applying the framework.
But NZR's Participation Development Manager, Mike Hester, says the unvaccinated won't miss out.
We want to make sure that all players can feel like and can see that they are welcome in rugby and that there are offerings available for them. They may not be able to access all competition offerings given the gathering limits and whatever traffic light setting they might be in, but there will be compliant offerings such as 10s and 7s.
NZR says the 26 provincial unions are all on board. RNZ did a ring around the regions this afternoon and responses were laced with trepidation. Unions in towns and clubs in the suburbs are still getting their heads around the announcement and didn't want to comment before being given time to discuss it with their communities. But Bridget Belsham, who's the CEO of Whanganui Rugby and chair of the Heartland Rugby Secretariat, said she doesn't want the decision to segregate the rugby community. They turned the comments off when they put the announcement on social media.
That doesn't affect the participants or our competitions because, we have limited amount of people playing senior rugby. If we have 30% of them, that may mean we might lose, 4 teams or something, which could really affect our competition. So we just got to look at how do we include those people that have opted not to for their own reason.
Back at NZR HQ, Steve Lancaster was aware there could be some pushback.
No matter what stance you take on these matters, inevitably there are a group of people that will be unhappy. And so, I'm sure there will be people that think we could have taken a different approach to this, but I want to reiterate that this is not New Zealand Rugby making any judgment calls here. This is New Zealand Rugby adopting the government's COVID protection framework and figuring out how we can apply that to rugby.
Just who will police whether teams are playing by the rules isn't set in stone, but Lancaster says there's a plan to record vaccination status in the registration system. Gordon Noble-Campbell from New Zealand Amateur Sport Association has praised NZR's stance, but he can also see where discussions still need to be had.
Let's assume a referees association decides that all of its referees need to be vaccinated, then I guess it'll be a question of which referees might want to referee the fixture for non-vaccinated players without CDCs.
He says clubs will have to start thinking about whether vaccinated and unvaccinated players can train at the same time. The club rugby season is still months away, so players, referees and administrators have plenty to think about as pre-season rolls around.
And Northland Big Cat Sanctuary, which has been closed to the public for nearly 8 years, is preparing to roar back into life tomorrow, this time with strict safety measures in place. Whangarei's Kamo Wildlife Sanctuary was once run by Craig Bush, the Lion Man, and the park was also the scene of a fatal tiger attack. Our cameraman Nick Monroe and reporter Nita Blake-Person paid them a visit.
Abdullah, the 15-year-old lion, is stalking his new enclosure on the outskirts of Whangarei, eagerly awaiting his daily feed. He's one of 17 endangered cats living at the Kamo Wildlife Sanctuary, cats that are living very different lives than they were a few years ago.
They used to charge the fence or they hid. Yes, Shanti still hides from crowds, but she doesn't do that with the keepers. We don't have guns that are ready when we're feeding the cats. And that's what they had to do in one particular enclosure up the top.
Oh, there he is. Sibylla's over there. Oh, yeah. You suddenly realise there's some action.
Jeanette Valance is the owner-operator here. She first visited the park at the end of 2017 and eventually bought it in June of 2019. And she says nothing here today is as it was back then.
They didn't have dens. They didn't have lock-off areas. They didn't have two keeper access points. The fences were too low or too big a hole or no footings. The openings in the mesh were too big. You could get a cat paw through. Savannah's notorious for putting her foot through and giving a keeper a tap on the way past. The mesh wasn't high enough or had no footings. Our cats don't dig because they have no claws. But you've got to build for the ones that can.
Up until recently, this enclosure behind me, which really can't be bigger than the size of a tennis court, was housing 2 fully grown tigers. It's since pretty much been condemned because it doesn't meet any of the required safety standards, and the new management are describing it as cruel because of the size of the cats and the tiny size of this enclosure.
About $10.3 million has been spent bringing it up to scratch, mainly funded by Murray Bolton of Bolton Equities. It was finally given the green light to open last month by the Ministry of Primary Industries.
We came in to fix a problem, and I think we've fixed it. It was a mammoth project though.
When Jeanette first visited the cats, they were highly medicated.
When we arrived, they looked like hippies from the 70s, like they were off their faces.
They've been weaned off the drugs, and these days Jeanette Valance says they're allowed to live their lives in peace. Most of the cats are quite old, and Valance says they definitely wouldn't survive in the wild.
We don't want to be a retirement home. It just happens that these guys are old. But in saying that, if that's what becomes available, that's fine. The ones I'm looking at through our friend in Spain, they're 2-year-old. The one I'm looking at in Hong Kong's 8 years old. So there is animals out there to be gained, looking after, whatever. And you don't own them. They're in your care.
There are lions, tigers, a leopard and a cheetah, and Jeanette Valance has plans for more big cats.
It is about bringing new stuff in so people can see them. But I'm not talking about, I wouldn't bring things in from the wild. Like that's not the plan. You'd be taking it from somewhere else who couldn't keep housing them. I cannot see the point in euthanizing something that doesn't need euthanizing. And if we've got a spot that we can take something that its only other option is they're going to get euthanized, well, we'll do it.
7.5 years after last being open to the public, Valance says bringing visitors in is about education, but the cats will always come first. Adrian Metcalf was among guests at a recent open day for suppliers of the park. He's looked after the locks and security since way back when the so-called Lion Man, Craig Bush, was last running the place.
I have to say these guys are probably the best management this place has had. Like I say, we've seen, how it's been run over the years, and just to see the way that they've come this far with all the enclosures and whatnot, and the fact that they've actually managed to open the park again is just fantastic.
He reckons it's just the boost the North needs.
We don't really have a lot here in Whangarei, so it'll just be good to see some tourism come back, and I hope, and I'm sure it's going to get flooded with people.
The latest guests all very impressed.
Most of them look pretty happy. This one seems to be happy because he's asleep.
It's actually better than I was expecting, just in terms of looks nicer environment for the animals. Yeah.
What were your kind of concerns?
Like the Tiger King.
It's pretty cool to see all the cats.
Prices start at $37 for an adult entry and $21 for a child. Bookings are essential, while entries limited to 100 people at a time. But Jeanette Valance encourages everyone to come for a visit and check out her pride.
Come and see what we've done. There's always a lot of gossip, and it's a very notorious place, as I've said before. So to see what we've done and appreciate what we've done.
The park roars into life at 10 a.m. tomorrow.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, I'm Marama Tipole. The Prime Minister believes it is safe for most of the country to move to orange on the COVID traffic light settings in time for New Year's Eve celebrations. All regions in red, except for Northland, go to orange on the morning of New Year's Eve. Jacinda Ardern says it will be approximately 4 weeks after the country moved into the traffic system, which is 2 infection cycles of the virus. She says case numbers have been coming down in Auckland, which is good news.
Here today we have carefully balanced a range of advice, views, risks and opportunities of all the relevant levels, and settled on an outcome that means the country will move into the new year with all but one region in the orange setting, and that people will be able to gather together, and that's because it will be safe to do so.
Concerts and New Year's festivals can go ahead under orange with no gathering limits as long as vaccine passes are checked. Auckland Mayor Phil Govt is optimistic about the city moving to the orange COVID protection level at the end of December. He says he was calling for a move down the traffic light scale because of the high percentage of eligible residents being vaccinated. But Mr Govt told Checkpoint he's not surprised that the government is being cautious.
I listened to the Prime Minister. She made the point that she wants to see a second transmission cycle from the moving to red before she acts. And, of course, we've got freedom to move outside the city from this Wednesday. So, better this year than not this year.
However, Phil Govt says the government is being a little more cautious than he would have liked. Northland's business chamber says small businesses will miss out on a key revenue period, with the region staying at red over the New Year period. The Northland Chamber of Commerce Chief Executive Steve Smith says summer is when their businesses make enough to last them through winter. He told Checkpoint that by far the majority of eligible people in Northland are vaccinated and the region should have moved down a setting.
Have we not done enough? Can we not just please get on with things? You can hear the frustration in my voice, I guess, but just not what we needed at this time of the year, that's for sure.
At 81%, Northland is the least vaccinated region and is the only one without at least 90% having had one dose. The government will be reviewing whether it's still comfortable with opening the border to Australia next year in light of the emerging Omicron variant. The government had already announced New Zealand residents and citizens in Australia would be able to forego MIQ and instead isolate at home for 7 days. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says ministers will now receive further advice on the Omicron variant in early January.
This check-in will be to confirm that we remain comfortable with this next step in our reconnecting work. I won't preempt the outcome of that check-in now, but it makes sense to ensure we assess the next move against all the latest information and advice we have, including the relative effectiveness of the vaccine against the Omicron variant.
Jacinda Ardern says other countries have already changed their isolation requirements because of Omicron. At least 80 people are now known to have been killed by tornadoes which ripped through Kentucky at the weekend, leaving dozens more missing and entire towns destroyed. And 14 others have reportedly been killed in 5 other states hit by storms. The BBC's Nomya Iqbal reports from Mayfield.
In an instant, this small town has entirely been wiped out. Flattened homes are now buried in their own debris. Toys, shoes and unfinished Christmas cards are scattered amongst the twisted metal and shredded trees. Minutes from one of the main churches here, a huge rescue operation is underway at a candle factory. More than 100 workers were on the night shift when the tornado tore through. Only 40 people have been rescued so far. In the state of Illinois, another factory is looking for its missing employees. The tornado destroyed an Amazon distribution factory.
Back home, a Dunedin nurse has been referred to a professional conduct committee by the Nursing Council after posting threats online against medical professionals involved in the COVID-19 vaccine rollout. Under the pseudonym Lauren Hill, the nurse posted a message to an anti-vax group on social media app Telegram. Timothy Brown has more.
RNZ has confirmed the woman in the video is Dunedin nurse Lauren Bransgrove, a clinical advisor for ACC. She has an almost 2-decade-long career in health, including previously working as a theatre nurse, but recently she has taken part in anti-vax protests in the southern city. In the video, Ms Bransgrove said if the vaccine is administered to 5 to 11-year-olds, it meant war, and she saw doctors and nurses involved as enemies. The Ministry of Health confirmed it is aware of the matter and is concerned. The police are also making inquiries.
And that's the news.
Tonight on Night's Tish Gray, whose new book Muster Dogs celebrates the team of Kelpies that help her manage the family cattle station in northwest Australia. Sport from a US perspective with Helene Elliott, and Eleanor Tremere discusses the role of the chosen one in sci-fi. You know, Neo from The Matrix, John Connor from The Terminator, but don't get us started on Rey from Star Wars. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday, Northland to the Kapiti Coast, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Rain spreading south today. Heavy at times, isolated thunderstorms and localised downpours this evening from Waikato to Taupo and Manawatu, also western Northland. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a few spots of rain. Wellington and Wairarapa, cloudy with isolated showers. Tomorrow, expect rain and possibly heavy in the morning. Marlborough, Tasman and Buller. Rain developing tomorrow morning with heavy falls in western Tasman. For Canterbury, North Otago, Dunedin and Clutha, isolated showers this evening about the high country. Cloudy tomorrow with patchy drizzle. For Western, Fiordland and Central Otago, cloudy with a few showers. For Southland, fine, apart from some low cloud tomorrow morning. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, but tomorrow expect some rain in the afternoon. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 6.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Auckland is set to shift to the orange light setting, but not before Christmas. The rules won't relax until the dying days of the year, kicking in from New Year's Eve. The same is true for every other red light region except one, Northland, the sole laggard when it comes to vaccination. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Forget last year's unstoppable summer. Auckland's at a standstill, stuck on red for nearly 3 more weeks. A red light Christmas.
I mean, I'm sick of lockdown. We're doing everything online and not visiting.
It's quite hard to attract people to a nightclub if they have to sit down.
The decision comes despite falling daily case numbers and rising vaccinations. 92% of eligible Aucklanders are now fully protected. Even so, that's not enough for Cabinet, just 10 days since the traffic lights came on. Aucklanders not going to orange till the very last day of December. New year, new light setting.
This decision means that Auckland will move approximately 4 weeks after they moved into the COVID protection framework at the beginning of the month, and will give extra time for any potential impacts of that move to be seen.
Oh, the orange were wonderful.
Yeah?
They're marvellous, about time.
The biggest difference between red and orange is the limit on people. At red, there's a 100-person cap for hospitality venues and events. Orange does away with that as long as vaccine certificates are used. Epidemiologists like Rod Jackson had warned against moving too quickly.
We have to be cautious. There's no other choice.
But the opposition disagrees. Both National and ACT want Auckland in orange now.
There's a lot of people in Auckland hospitality who will be tearing their hair out with frustration.
The Prime Minister is not taking even her own rules seriously, and what she's saying to Aucklanders is maybe they shouldn't either.
The rest of New Zealand will either shift to or stay in orange at the same time as Auckland, all but Northland. That region's been held back for its lower vax rates. Just 81% are double jabbed.
I do want to acknowledge the huge work that is being undertaken in Northland and the enormous progress that is being made there too. But I do think it's right to be cautious in this move.
I think it's rubbish. Why can't Far North, if they want to protect themselves, they should be in the red, but the rest of Northland shouldn't be.
The freedom is just not there.
It's like living in North Korea.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
I work in a cafe and it's just separated people.
As a health professional, I absolutely understand it. I'm disappointed because it makes it difficult and it's tough for Northland, but I absolutely understand it.
Northland will remain at red and everywhere else at orange until at least January the 17th, when Cabinet meets again to review the settings.
The Lakes DHB, which covers Rotorua and Taupo districts, will move to the orange zone on the 30th of December. Torben Landel from the 2 Mile Sailing Club in Taupo joins me now. So, Torben, what do you reckon?
Look, well, wasn't the news that we were after. We really felt we'd done a lot of work the last 2 weeks with our vax rates to put us in a position to go to orange on Wednesday 100%. So, again, not the news that Taupo was after at all.
So, when we spoke last time, you were planning a New Year's party. Didn't know where you stood on that. So, is it on?
Yes, definitely. Obviously, we moved to orange on midnight on the 30th. So, for us, we're fortunate we can still run that event. But, you know, for a lot of events in Taupo between Christmas and New Year, they can't run, which is, you know, devastating for the economy.
Yeah, what does a halfway house mean for you? Because it's several weeks of summer that you're not going to be able to trade at maximum capacity.
Look, it's just another blow, really. Like I say, 91% first dose and 84% second dose. It's, you know, well and truly the highest in the world, and we've still got these restrictions put on us. So it's disappointing from the government.
Do you think it should have been a more nuanced system? Because I know in Taupo proper, you've got relatively high vaccination rates, but it's obviously viewed across the whole DHB catchment.
Look, I can't comment for what's happening in Rotorua, but, you know, all I know is Taupo needs to be at orange. You know, that's what we need coming into the next few weeks. You know, from the 15th, we're going to have the demand from Auckland coming down, from everyone coming to Taupo for the summer season, and we're sort of half-cocked now.
So what does the 100-person capacity mean for your place until you go to orange?
Look, we've been fortunate to have designated areas, so we've managed to increase our numbers slightly. But again, table service, there's a lot more rules and regulations we've got to follow, which makes our operation a lot harder to run. It makes it a lot harder for our customers. And there's just a huge amount of regulations that we've got to follow now. Obviously, checking vax passports when people come in is just... things are extremely difficult at the moment. Also, when things have gone to red, trade has gone down significantly for the hospitality sector across the board. So it's really a blow.
Torben, talk to me about the vaccination certificates. You say, it takes up more time. How is it going with them, and how are people reacting to having to present them?
Look, everyone who's got a vax passport is more than happy to present it. But again, it's just another layer of complexity that comes into our operation. So, it puts the team under pressure. But we've been fortunate. We haven't had too many people be negative towards us. We've come out publicly and said we're following the traffic light systems, which requires a vaccine passport. We've been fortunate that we haven't copped too much flack, whereas I know other hospitality businesses around the community have been unfortunate. But it's just a very difficult position for everyone to be in, and it's upsetting to be in this position, to have to turn away customers that have supported us for a long time because they've made a decision not to get vaccinated. So, look, again, this falls into we're running a vaccinated site. So again, why are we not at orange? We're only letting people onto our site who are vaccinated. So it's just, it just feels like we've done all this work and it's been a waste of time.
Can you make up the lost ground over the rest of the summer?
No, you can't because you've got huge visitation over that period. And that visitation doesn't get suppressed and come back later in the month or later in the summer. It's there. People have got time off from work, and they're down here wanting to have a good time and have a holiday.
Really appreciate your time this evening. Best of luck. That's Torben Landl, who's from the 2 Mile Sailing Club in Taupō. It is 14 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Renting a home is getting more expensive, particularly in Hawke's Bay, where rent prices have increased 20.4% in a year. Massey University's latest rental report shows a 9.4% rent increase across the country, putting the squeeze on tenants. Jake McKee has the story.
Massey University Property Studies Professor Graham Squires, who co-authored the report, says the situation is stark.
Sadly, when we look at rental affordability or house price affordability, it's quite a bleak picture and appears to be getting bleaker.
Graham Squires says Auckland and Wellington continue to be the most expensive places to rent and the West Coast is the cheapest. But he says it's a surprise to see huge rent price jumps in the regions, the largest being Hawke's Bay, followed by Bay of Plenty, Manawatu, Whanganui, Northland and Gisborne.
When we're seeing issues in the indices, when we look at wages and rents in these other regions, it's showing a new picture that's emerging.
He thinks the heat of the housing market is spreading and says anecdotally it's because people are moving away from expensive main centres. He says renters nationwide will find it more problematic until housing supply increases.
For landlords, they would argue that, there's a lot more pressures on landlords to increase rents, things like changes in policy.
Property Investors Federation Executive Officer Sharon Colwick agrees, saying there's no incentive at the moment for private landlords to help increase supply. She says the 20.4% rent increase in Hawke's Bay is definitely a supply and demand issue, but 110 houses being built in Flaxmere could help. However, she notes Hawke's Bay has some of the country's highest rates of people in emergency housing.
So we do know there's a dire need for more houses, but what we don't need is we do not need any more government legislation that stops private landlords getting into the market that can help increase the supply and give those people a house to live in.
Yvonne Dickey from Hastings-based budgeting charity Budget First says more clients now go directly to the Ministry of Social Development for housing support. She says the rental situation is getting difficult and she worries about overcrowding and the idea of affordable housing getting out of reach.
Whānau that are actually in the rental space, some of them paying high rents. They can't even afford to save for a deposit on a home. Their incomes are already stretched. as it is.
Renters United spokesperson Ashok Jacob says the national situation is unacceptable. He says issues relating to and stemming from rent affordability won't improve until the government makes price interventions in the housing market.
Now to central Otago, where some of New Zealand's most endangered animals have long called the country's coldest and driest climate home. A fifth of New Zealand lizard species live in the area, but more than ever, they need a helping hand to survive. Our reporter Timothy Brown and camera operator Nathan McKinnon spent the afternoon with those ensuring their survival.
So I'll go back today and look at our catalogue and just see whether we've got him or not. And if I can't find a pattern like that, I'll go, woohoo, a new baby.
That's Grant Norbury photographing a young grand skink. His day job is with Manaaki Whenua, but he's also chair of the Central Otago Ecological Trust, which oversees the Moka Moka Dryland Sanctuary near Alexandra.
We've built a predator-proof fence enclosing 14 hectares, and what we're trying to do here is restore native lizards that have become locally extinct.
He says threats to New Zealand's lizards can come from surprising sources.
The conventional predators of these lizards are cats and ferrets and stoats and weasels and rats. Even hedgehogs eat lizards. But we had some Dutch students out at our little pilot fence one day, and they saw a mouse attacking a 1 foot long Otago skink.
And those threats and the delicate balance required to keep the lizards alive is why Moka Moka is so important. 150 grand skinks, Otago skinks and jewelled geckos were introduced to the sanctuary in 2018. They appear to be thriving.
We've seen about 20 young of each species grown in Otago, newborns that are in here, and that's really good. That's a really good sign because they haven't been breeding all that well in captivity, but they're really booming here. So I'll be happier once we get to a number out here that's higher than the founder population. Then we can really start celebrating.
They share their home with the local populations of schist gecko, southern grass skink and the macaque skink, who are also booming in the sanctuary. Joining us are volunteers Tom Lamb and Selwyn Tompkins. The pair play a role in maintaining the sanctuary and its wildlife despite being well into their retirement years. Mr Lamb was born in central Otago and says the hills feel like home.
I just love being out here, and you can hear skylarks and things like that out here that we haven't been able to hear for quite a while.
About an hour away in Ranfurly lives Carrie Knox, a herpetologist. That's lizard expert in layman's terms. He says in recent decades the number of known New Zealand lizard varieties has grown from about 50 to more than 120. A fifth of those are found in central Otago, and almost half are under threat of extinction, much like their relatives throughout the country.
We've got 14 that are in really big trouble, and then another few dozen after that are in not far behind, also in a bit of trouble. Yeah, so there's lots of work to be done to kind of make sure that those species don't go extinct and that they're still around for my kids to see when they grow up.
Mr Knox says that's why conservation efforts are so important. He even keeps a rock garden in his backyard to support lizard life. The impact of European colonisation on New Zealand's lizards is clear. Otago and grand skinks, which are nationally endangered, probably naturally called areas like Moka Moka home until very recently.
The grand and Otago skinks were probably still there back around the sort of 1950s, 1960s. So not that long ago, but had been wiped out over time by predators.
Mr Knox will be heading out into the hills and ranges this summer to catalogue and potentially discover New Zealand's lizards.
If you're listening to that on radio, do go online and check out Nathan's pictures that he filmed there. You can see some of the lizards. Australia is just days out from the return of international students and skilled migrants. Businesses across the country are anxiously awaiting their arrival, yet some believe a dire labour shortage will persist for some time. Here's the ABC's Gavin Coote.
The international border closure has made an ongoing problem worse for businessman John Nixon.
Impossible to find staff. Everything's short.
The owner of a restaurant, motel and other accommodation along the south coast of New South Wales relies heavily on people from overseas to fill kitchen, housekeeping and office jobs. And for John Nixon, finding a chef is out of the question.
We do put advertisements up, so we try and source people from overseas because there's not a lot of people generally want to work in a hot kitchen.
Even with international students and skilled visa holders expected to start arriving from Wednesday, John Nixon is having to make some tough decisions during what should be his busiest time of year.
Closing extra days, obviously we'll close public holidays so that the existing staff that we have on a permanent basis can have days off. We wouldn't be able to open parts of the restaurant, so closing out tables for booking, especially on the outside areas, so that we can manage the amount of people do come through, because we are one chef down as well. Lunch is out. We won't be able to staff lunch, so we're only doing nights. Accommodation, we've gone from, say, 2-night minimum to 4-night minimum, which does save a lot of labour, so that the staff room changeovers only have to do it every 3 or 4 days. That does help us, and it is a busy period, and people do want to book, and the only way they can book is to come and stay for, say, 3 or 4 days.
Others aren't counting on the situation improving anytime soon. Tim Neuenhaus is the director of Workfast, a labour hire company that supplies blue and white-collar staff in the energy, resources, rail and tunnel construction industries. He points out the wave of infrastructure spending across Australia is only making the labour market even tighter.
It's actually getting worse and probably will get much worse. So there's a twofold effect where you're locked into your state and can't travel, or there's a fear of travelling, and then the infrastructure projects are starting. So I think we're going to see a much greater problem mid to late next year.
And are there particular states or regions or cities where the skills shortage is at its most acute?
It's actually acute everywhere, to tell you the truth. WA is just because the state's locked down, so the mining sector there, it's very, very tight. In Sydney and Melbourne, it's already tight and the major projects haven't even started.
A desperate search for survivors continues in the US, where devastating tornadoes have killed more than 100 people, with dozens more missing. Entire towns have been destroyed, and a disaster has been declared in the state of Kentucky. Dozens died when a candle factory collapsed. The BBC's Nomia Iqbal reports.
We have over 300 guardsmen that are active. They are out in our communities. They're doing everything from going door to door, though. In many of these communities, we don't have doors anymore. They're going rubble to rubble, searching, hopefully for survivors, but otherwise to at least have certainty for families.
There were more than 30 tornadoes that ripped through 6 states, but one hurtled down a single track of more than 200 miles. It's thought to be the longest path ever taken by a tornado in US history. It flattened many homes whilst leaving others untouched. In an instant, the small town of Mayfield has been almost entirely wiped out. Flattened homes are now buried in their own debris, toys and shoes scattered amongst the twisted metal and shredded trees by a swarm of tornadoes that no one had prepared for.
How long are you here for?
Dineen is looking for her cousin who lives downtown.
Everybody's cell phone is down, and I get up early and I'm just so nervous I couldn't sleep. And just to really see, because I couldn't get through here yesterday. And I drive a school bus, and everything over there is destroyed. It's just heartbreaking.
Minutes from the church, a huge rescue operation is still underway at a candle factory. More than 100 workers were on Christmas shifts when the tornado tore through. 40 people made it out.
Mercedes may appeal against Max Verstappen's Formula One championship victory, despite race officials dismissing the team's post-race protests. In the final race of an already contentious season, Verstappen overtook Lewis Hamilton on the final lap to clinch the world title. CNN's Don Riddell has this report.
Mercedes had submitted 2 appeals, but they were both rejected hours after the end of the race. After 21 races and thousands of miles, it all came down to this. Advantage Verstappen, the Red Bull man, starting from pole position, but Hamilton made a flying start, leading by the first corner. Verstappen fought back, pushing Hamilton off the track, and the Mercedes driver had nowhere else to go. It gave him an advantage, though, cutting the corner off the chicane. He raced into the lead, and despite Red Bull's complaints, the stewards in race control allowed Hamilton to keep his position. And for the next 57 laps, he built on his lead. While the 7-time world champion was out in front, dreaming of what would be a record 8th world title, Red Bull were forced to gamble. Verstappen changed his tyres once, then twice, with Mercedes choosing just one stop and leaving Hamilton out on the track. They simply did not want to lose their track position. But Red Bull were playing a chasing game, and they felt that they had nothing to lose with their strategy. Their team principal, Christian Horner, said at one point during the race they would need a miracle to win it. And that miracle came 5 laps from the end when Nicholas Latifi crashed into the barriers, bringing out the safety car onto the track. And in that moment, Hamilton's 11-second lead evaporated, but he was still leading. And it was unclear if there would be any more racing before the end. Verstappen also had lapped cars between him and Hamilton, but in extraordinary scenes, those cars and the safety car controversially all melted away before the final lap. And a season that went down to the wire would now be decided over the last 3 miles. Hamilton in front, but on fading tyres. Verstappen on a fresh set and ready to pounce. With everyone's hearts in their mouths, the Dutchman made his move, passing Hamilton and then defending his position to clinch his first ever title. Just as it has been for the entire season, it was gripping, it was dramatic, and it was controversial. Mercedes felt really hard done by at the end, but it's Red Bull and Verstappen who are the champions.
It's unbelievable. I mean, throughout the whole race I kept fighting, and then of course that opportunity in the last lap, it's incredible. I'm still having a cramp, but it's insane. It's insane. I mean, I don't know what to say. These guys here of my team, and of course Honda as well, they deserve it. I love them so much, and I really enjoy working with them already since 2016, but this year has been incredible.
Firstly, a big congratulations to Max and to his team. I think we did an amazing job this year. My team, everyone back at the factory, all the men and women we have and here worked so hard this whole year. It's been the most difficult of seasons, and I'm so proud of them, so grateful to be a part of the journey with them.
Many people are very unhappy with the outcome of this race, not because of anything that Red Bull did wrong, more because it seemed like the sports governing body were making up the rules as they went along. But the fact is that Max Verstappen is the new Formula One champion.
Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton had the Drivers' Championship. They were in control. They did have the quicker car in the race today. And then obviously what happened at the end of the race. Red Bull knew they needed a miracle. In fact, Christian Horner, the team principal, said in an interview during the race they needed a miracle for this championship to go their way, and that happened. So I think it's just multiplied by the fact that not only have we had this championship battle raging all the way since March, but we've also had this controversy at the end, and the fact that you had one team going from the brink of winning to despair, and the other team and driver going the other way.
Well, that's sport, isn't it? Here's some feedback from you all. Lots on the traffic light system and the changes to orange for some. This person says we cancelled our holiday booking in the far north as we Aucklanders heard that we were not welcome even if we were fully vaccinated, going south instead. Northland should and will remain in the red zone until more people get vaccinated. I feel sorry for local businesses being held to ransom by those who are selfish and unvaccinated. On Phil Goff, this person says Phil sounded jolly, cavalier and jaunty, Lisa, when so many Auckland families are in pain and facing the wall. He must have put such a strong case to his Labour mates. A foot in each camp is our Phil, they say. From 5 a.m. on First Up tomorrow, all aboard, but only if you have a vaccine passport or a negative test. Air New Zealand is live with the rules for domestic travel.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Auckland Mayor, Phil Govt, says with high vaccination rates and COVID-19 cases on a downward trend, there was a firm case to move the city to orange on the traffic light system. Northland New Year's Festival Northern Base is postponed as the region remains in the red setting. The COVID response minister says the government wants as much time as possible to understand the Omicron variant before reopening the border for Australian travellers. ACC is distancing itself from an anti-vax nurse who works as a clinical advisor. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Rowdier than the debating chamber at question time, it's Party People. Tauhinare and Shane Te